So I'm doing a mini-series here on application of artificial intelligence to medicine. I quoted an article in there about how much we need help as docs in terms of making diagnoses. And the numbers were so bad, I realized I'm going to need to go deep into detail on this article. I think most docs that watch this would say, well, how did they do that study? We get more than half of our easy diagnoses right. And we certainly get more than 10% or 5% of our difficult diagnoses right. That cannot be true. I think it is true. I think this is good research. It was covered in JAMA Internal Medicine, November 25th, 2013. So that's where I'm going to go into today, the details of that study. If you think that, that's even anywhere near close, it brings a whole new perspective on a lot of the comments and complaints you see on my channel. Other channels, I mean, YouTube is just full of docs criticizing other docs, patients criticizing docs. And again, it's very frustrating. If you go in to see a doc and your life is dependent on him getting the right diagnosis before you can even get started, and it's 50 as low as 5% probability of getting it right, that can generate some emotion. That can create frustration. This is not a new issue, though. Look, this is actually a copy. I mean, this is a picture of the very old, the old version of my alma mater, the amphitheater for physician rounds at Johns Hopkins. This fellow right here, the bottom row, second to the right, is William Osler. He's had a lot of street cred in terms of medicine, but one of his quotes, he used to have docs get the history from patients, try to make the diagnosis, and there's one of his famous quotes. He lost patients, and he said, "Listen to your patient. He's telling you the diagnosis." So, again, not a new issue. Now, once we finish this video, I think you might start asking the same question I've asked, as I started to look at that. I always thought that, William Osler was pretty good. Now I'm beginning to wonder how we knew. Wonder what what percentage he got right. Now, just a comment, there are other folks like Ativ Maroda at Harvard who's looked at some of the AI that's out there called, he calls them symptom checkers, and he did a study on them and found that again, it was great fodder for the docs and patients and people that don't like the idea of looking up something on the internet. He said, look, these are only correct 3/4 of the time. I mean, 34% of the time. 34%, so we shouldn't use them. As Dr. Maroda has done before, and docs often do when they do studies, he forgot to ask some of his, what am I assuming? And again, his assumption was the doctors are making the correct diagnosis. So here we go. We're going to go into that JAMA article and talk about how they did this study. I mean, for those of you like docs, there's a lot of docs that watch this channel, and I'm expecting to get some pushback, but maybe not. I'll put the link to this article under the video. It's JAMA Internal Medicine, 2013, and again, I gave you the reference earlier on the first image. So, what's the importance? The relationship between physicians' diagnostic accuracy and their confidence in that accuracy. They're actually asking a slightly different question. They're saying, if the doc's right, does the doc know it? Or if the doc's wrong, does the doc know it? That's also actually a very important question, don't you think? They call it Diagnostic calibration, defined as the relationship between diagnostic accuracy and confidence in that accuracy. Now, how did they build this study? First of all, how did they recruit the docs? Recruited general internists from an online physician community. I think it's Quantia Med, but we'll cover that a little bit later. Asked them to diagnose 4 previously validated case vignettes of variable difficulty. Too easy, too more difficult. That's the same way Marotta did his study of the computers and said the computers were not adequate for this job. I don't think these guys are the docs not adequate for this job. I'll just say this. A lot of this is going to sound very critical of docs, but just think about it. I'm a doc. I've spent my life, a huge portion, probably about 60% of my career supervising other docs. This information rings true with my experience. And I used to think, for example, that I got a great history from, when I was training, I felt like I got a great history from patients. I didn't need all the labs that other docs needed. That was a mistake, and I've changed that. But we'll get to that in this study. Okay, after each phase, physicians recorded 1 to 3 differential diagnoses and corresponding judgments of confidence. In other words, here's what I think he's got, and here's how confident I am in that diagnosis. And then they were asked, is there anything else that I want to get? Any other labs, x-rays, etc. They scored their diagnostic accuracy as 0 or 1. I mean, either it was correct or it wasn't. But then confidence was scored on 0 to 10. What do I think? And the typical answer was a 7 out of 10 that I got it right. That's what the docs answered on there, and we'll cover that. Now, they surveyed and requested about 600 and something docs to do this. Once they got up to 118 that agreed, they said, okay, that's enough. The docs correctly diagnosed 55.3% of easier cases and 5.8% of more difficult cases. The probability of that occurring at random is less than 1 in 1,000. Despite a very large difference in the accuracy of these two, the difference in confidence was relatively small, 7.2 versus 6.4 out of 10. In other words, they still thought they got it right. Or I should say, we still thought we got it right. I was not a subject in that study, but again, all of us are in the same boat. It's not the individual, it's medicine, where it is, and the fact that we've got a long way to go. Okay, conclusions and relevance. Our study suggests that the physician's level of confidence may be relatively insensitive to both diagnostic accuracy and case difficulty. This mismatch might prevent physicians from re-examining difficult cases where their diagnosis may be incorrect. I'm going to cover a few other things. I think it was, again, this is, I will be getting into some of the details now for those of you, especially the docs, who are saying, this can't be right, I'm not that bad. Diagnostic errors obviously lead to patient harm, and it's received inadequate exploration. If you're surprised about this number, then there's good reason. We haven't been looking at it. Physician overconfidence is thought to be one of many contributing factors to diagnostic error. It occurs when the relationship between accuracy and confidence is miscalibrated and misaligned. In other words, you're confident even though you don't have a clue. Empirical evidence supporting this has been scarce. So again, that was the purpose of actually doing this study. At that time, it was unclear how confidence relates to physician resource requests, such as specialized tests, referrals, second opinions, labs, etc. You remember when I was doing my own mea culpa a few minutes ago, I was saying, as I was training, I thought I was a great doc because I listened to patients, I got a lot more information, and I didn't rely on labs. It's like other docs would see the patient for 5 minutes and order a bunch of labs. it was correct that I needed to listen more. As you'll see in here, docs need to listen better. But to assume that you know it and not get a lab is a mistake. And as you've seen with John, and as you'll hear from other patients that I've had over the past few years, I've given up a little of that arrogance as well and am ordering a lot more tests. As my friend and acquaintance Joel Kahn, the cardiologist in prevention, would say, don't guess, test. Now, it's also unclear how, okay, we covered that. Let's go back over here on materials. What did the case vignettes look like? There were 4 of them. They were based on real world cases, authored by medical experts, and cases were selected from a validated pool used in previous studies. To select cases of relatively difficult levels, they took assignments by 3 case authors and developed an agreement. Now, if you think about this, you remember the Mayrota study where he was challenging the computers and artificial intelligence. These materials, these methods, again, are very, very similar. They put clinical vignettes in front of the computers, just like they're putting clinical vignettes in front of the doctors here. Now, to determine if physicians adjust their confidence level with the case difficulty, they selected 2 easy ones, 2 hard ones. And as you saw, they didn't adjust. They were confident. Now for the docs, okay, what were the cases like? Here's 3 of them. One was a 23-year-old Hispanic male migrant worker from Mexico who presented with right upper quadrant pain, abdominal pain. He drank water from streams, et cetera, et cetera. For the docs in the viewers, you're thinking, okay, if from Mexico, if young, if he was drinking water from streams, you're thinking, maybe amoebiasis and things like that. Case 2, 60-year-old man with crampy lower abdominal pain, 3 weeks duration, anemia, recent weight loss. His examination showed pale conjunctiva. Again, you're starting to go through your if-thens. The more difficult case, Case 3, a 25-year-old woman with headaches, macular rash. For the non-physicians, that's just a description of the type of rash. It's flat and red splotches. And vertigo, and that's dizziness. Medical history included genital herpes and chlamydia. Examination showed a rash. Again, the docs are beginning to think of their if-then. I won't go through any more of that, but I will go down to other components of the procedure. As I said, it was from Quantium Med. Quantium Med actually verifies physician status using account creation and checking it on some of the national databases to make sure, yes, these are docs. And the 4 vignettes were and Quantium Med, the docs that use Quantium Med are not dumber than the rest of us. I can tell you that. They're actually good docs. They're docs that are getting their CME. And you may say, again, this is a bunch of dumb docs. No, it's not. And you may also say, well, if we had academic docs in there, that would be a different story. There were a lot of academic docs. I don't remember if it was a third or a quarter or a half, but we'll get there. So these were good docs. These were it was a typical cross-section of what you have in the United States. The 4 vignettes were, back to the procedures, the 4 vignettes were presented in random order. Physicians used free text to record 1 to 3 differential diagnoses. And differential just means what's the list? What am I thinking of? Which ones am I trying to differentiate from? Only 1 final diagnosis and confidence judgment was recorded after the 4th phase. Confidence data was rated on an 11-point scale, 0 to 10, with 0 thinking I've totally missed it, and 10 meaning I know I got that. So, as I mentioned, let's talk a little bit about the docs. The docs, maybe they were just young and out of school and didn't know anything, right? Or maybe they were just really old guys, 70 years old. For those of you that are age biased, they were neither. It was 48, average age was 48. Well, how about maybe they were inexperienced? Again, it wasn't experience. The average experience was 16.5 years. How about, well, they were academic or not? You didn't have the good Harvard docs in there. 39% of these docs were from academic roles. So you know, again, thanks for your patience. You know the rest of the story. I'll just quote it very quickly. Diagnostic accuracy was worse for the more difficult cases, 55.3% versus 5.8%. Despite all that, that didn't impact their confidence at all, or very little. Their confidence was on a scale of 6.4 out of 10 for the very difficult cases and 7.0 out of 10 for the easy cases. So they were still pretty sure they got it right, even though they were flat wrong. Oh, and here's the actual image that shows this. This is these are the easy cases on the left, the difficult cases on the right. The easy cases, the probability of getting it right, as you see, is here, this lower line. And the probability of getting it right, diagnostic accuracy is again less than 10% or less than 1 out of 10 on the more difficult cases. Here's the assumption, the confidence level, again about 70% on the easy cases and just a little bit less than 70% on the hard cases where they usually got it wrong. That's disappointing. I know it is. It's frustrating, but you know, like I said before, it helps you understand a little bit more about why you are so frustrated with this process and why you're not the only one. Guys like William Osler, myself, tons of us who've done this for a living, very frustrated with the state of medicine. But still, we got to move on. So what do we got to do? Well, let's finish up what the authors of this article think we need to do next and what this means. These findings suggest that physicians might not request required additional resources. Let's go back and see what they meant for that. Physician confidence was related to how often they requested an important additional resource, diagnostic tests, labs, etc. And when faced with more difficult cases, the only resource physicians were more likely to request was reference materials. In essence, physicians did not request more second opinions. I will say this, on a personal basis, I've always said, when it's a significant issue, you need to get a second opinion. Even if I'm the doc, the first doc, you need to get a second opinion. We also found physician characteristics were related to requests for additional resources. For specifically, increased experience was associated with decreased likelihood of requesting second opinions, curbside consults, reference materials, regardless of diagnostic accuracy. And I would add, and computer artificial intelligence. Docs just don't think they need it, typically. This corresponds with findings in previous research suggesting that there might be differences in how experienced physicians approach the diagnostic process. So again, the more experienced physicians felt like, I got a better history, I knew what to do, I don't need the labs. Again, I did my mea culpa on that, I've moved on. Here's another item that I always had concern about. People tend to have bias against internationally trained docs. Let's look at what happened with the international medical graduates. Also, being an international medical graduate was associated with increased likelihood of requesting reference materials, suggesting that medical school training or early training might influence the way physicians seek help in making diagnoses. Future research should further examine how confidence is related to the evolving reasoning process and how this relates to physician risk aversion. In other words, I've always felt like the docs that did best were the docs that sought other opinions, that sought that are constantly questioning their diagnosis, their conclusions. And what this research tells us about that area is, look, that's true. And in fact, instead of international medical graduates maybe not being so good, they tend to look it up. They continue to question their own diagnosis. They ask for consults. They ask for more reference, more information. So it also brings up my other point. I've always been, I have never felt like foreign medical studies actually indicated a bad doc. In fact, if you look at my first 2 years of medical school at the University of South Carolina, very well respected school, but way too arcane. If you go to the international medical schools, they tend to focus, what does the doc need to know to see a patient? When you look at my first 2 years at MUSC, it wasn't even less than 5% was actually taught by doctors who'd ever seen a patient. The vast majority of it was taught by PhDs who wanted to talk about their pathology research or their physiology research. Again, so if your doc's a foreign medical graduate, this article might say that's a good thing, and I might agree. Okay, does the study have limitations? Yes, I mean, every study has limitations. The biggest and most obvious one is that's not real world. You're, again, putting artificial vignettes in front of a patient. In conclusion, we've already covered their basic conclusions here. Docs need to understand maybe we're not as good as we think. And after going through this, again, you may ask the same question I have as I've gotten further into it. How about William Osler? Everybody thought he was really good, and he thought he was really good. And he was able to point out a lot of errors with the standard docs of his time. But doesn't that make you wonder, what portion of the time did William Osler get it right? Thanks for your interest. I just want to make another point. Where is it? Yes, there's a team that I'm working with who's actually working on trying to improve this situation. Are they going to make it? I don't know. I think that that remains to be seen. But is it something that clearly needs to be done? Oh, yes, it needs to be done. Thank you very much for your interest.